I now give the floor to the representative of Syrian Arab Republic. You have the floor.
شكرا سيدي الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation learnt of the conceptual note for this meeting. We very much appreciate the efforts deployed by the permanent representative of Indonesia in this regard. My delegation has also studied the report of the Secretary General entitled Protecting Civilians in Armed Conflict, and I would like to, in this regard, tell you of the strong absolute reservations of the government of my country with regard to the description armed conflict with regard to wars underway, and to qualify Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra and other armed groups in this way. We have a lot of remarks to make and a lot of national reservations with regard to the erroneous evaluations that have been made and the incomplete conclusions that are contained in this report. We will pass these on to the Secretariat in an official letter. Madam President, protection of civilians is the responsibility of sovereign states and their institutions. They are the only ones responsible for preserving security and stability in their country. They are responsible for fighting terrorism, violence, and crime, and to put an end to all end of armed presence or illegal weapons. The Minister spoke of this question in her statement, and we thank her for that. On that basis, recognized by national constitutions and the UN Charter, the Syrian Arab Republic will pursue its cooperation with its allies and will respect its obligations and its right to protect its citizens from terrorist armed groups who are still contain in their ranks tens of thousands of foreign terrorist fighters who have come to Syria from more than 100 member states of this organization. And this evaluation is also documented in the reports of the UN committees of the Security Council relating to the fight against terrorism. This is not national propaganda. I'm speaking about the subsidiary bodies to combat terrorism of the Security Council. The Syrian people have suffered from this war that is supported by governments that you're well aware of. But Syria has been able, thanks to its allies, that adhere to the Charter and its principles, we've been able to preserve the work of our institutions. We have fought terrorism without hesitation, and in parallel to that, our government has been able to promote cooperation with the Russian government and other allies in order to arrive at measures that have put an end to the bloodshed and protect civilians. The measures are as follows. The national reconciliation process has made it possible for very many fighters to lay down their arms in exchange for amnesty. We've been able to restore stability and security in areas that previously were under the control of armed groups, and civilians have been able to go back to their houses and resume their normal lives. We have achieved agreements with regard to de-escalation zones, and we've been able to put an end to fighting, and we've seen a return of the authority of the Syrian state to the majority of the lands that were under the control of Daesh terrorists, the Al-Nusra Front, and terrorist organizations affiliated with them, armed terrorist groups affiliated with them. Thirdly, the commitment to the political process in cooperation with the Special Envoy of the Secretary General in Syria on the basis of Security Council resolutions 254, which mentions a political process led under Syrian leadership without foreign interference. That criterion is not respected by a lot of governments who are still preventing this process by interfering in a harmful and destructive way in the decision-making process, which is supposed to be a Syrian-led process. Mr. President, we are facing a moral and legal crisis and also a trust crisis. This is hindering international work of the United Nations. Some governments have destroyed entire countries and their entire capacity, such as Libya, under the pretext of exercise of protecting civilians, and governments are erroneously interpreting the charter to justify military aggressions and to occupy, saying that they are protecting civilians. And economic measures and unilateral measures are being imposed on populations such as the Syrian people, Cuba, Venezuela, against Iran, North Korea. These governments. And these governments are calling this preventive diplomacy, but the majority of countries and the majority of countries are supporting the occupation by Israel of the West Bank and the Golan Heights. This will fail. To ensure the protection of civilians must ensure respect for the Charter first and foremost. Protection of civilians means that we cannot manipulate the principles of the Charter, and we cannot become involved in domestic matters. The key mandate of the Security Council is to preserve international peace and security and to prevent conflicts and to address the deep-rooted causes of armed conflict. And on that basis, we now have a real opportunity to address this issue seriously and to address its causes, its root causes. That begins by replying to direct questions. What was the pretext that justified the occupation of Iraq, which destroyed all of its capacity? For 17 years until now, we haven't heard any excuse for those that have invaded Iraq, or a justification for that war, or anyone taking responsibility for it. What is the justification for the attacks against a country such as Libya and for destroying that country? The same situation. This was done in a flagrant manner. Libya was invaded under the pretext of protecting civilians. Libya was divided up, plundered, and the resources plundered amounts to billions of dollars in value. And also creating problems with regard to the Libyan constitution. Why is it that the governments of certain countries participated in a terrorist, dirty war against my country, Syria? Today, we put these questions to the Security Council. We want to get some answers. We have to have the courage to recognize that there are governments that have political, military, and economic influence, countries which are working in the background in a flagrant way in the international organizations, and they are using these situations as laboratories for their experiments, and they do not respect the Charter. These countries are the cause of multiple areas of tension and conflict and fires breaking out throughout the world, and they play here the role then of firemen and corrupt policemen. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Syrian Arab Republic.